Every episode of Las Fierbinți opens a window into the chaotic yet poetic rhythm of small-town life, but Doctorul Dorel, Partea Uai, transforms that familiar blend of humor and melancholy into a near philosophical exploration of belief, ignorance, and longing. The episode takes a seemingly simple premise, a man pretending to be a doctor, and turns it into an unexpectedly profound reflection on identity and self-worth. In the dusty lanes and cluttered backyards of Fierbinți, Dorel's transformation into Doctorul Dorel becomes a microcosm of human desire, the wish to matter, even in the smallest, most foolish way. The opening scene of the episode begins at the village bar, that eternal heart of Las Fierbinți, where laughter and vodka often dissolve the pain of poverty. Bobiță, Gianni, and Celentano debate about modern life in the city, mocking how people respect anyone with a diploma or a white coat. Dorel, sitting at the edge of the table, listens quietly. When he finally speaks, "It can't be that hard to be a doctor. You just need to talk like you know something." The bar explodes in laughter. Yet, there is something in his tone that goes beyond jest. The camera lingers on his face a little too long, showing not embarrassment, but curiosity. For a moment, the viewer senses that the line between joke and dream has already blurred. The next sequence, showing Dorel wandering home under the flickering yellow light, is filled with small details that define the show's tone. The barking dogs, the sound of cicadas, the faint melody of a folk song playing from a nearby radio. These elements ground the story in a lived reality. When Dorel stops at his gate and stares at his reflection in the glass of his shed window, one can almost see the thought forming. What if they're wrong? What if he really could be a doctor? The brilliance of this moment lies in its silence. There is no dramatic score, no exaggerated acting. The entire idea of the episode is born out of one man's momentary escape from ridicule. As Dorel begins his transformation, the comedy becomes visual. He raids the local clinic's trash for discarded medical forms, buys a second-hand white coat from the market, and glues a red cross onto a plank of wood with Dr. Dorel, Consultații complete, written in crooked letters. Each step is absurd, yet sincere, reflecting the strange dignity people find in pretending. The camera observes rather than mocks him. This distinction is crucial. Las Fierbinți never ridicules its characters cruelly. Instead, it reveals the quiet nobility of their delusions. The first consultation is a masterpiece of rural improvisation. Firicel's wife, convinced that her husband's snoring is a medical condition, drags him to Dorel's office. The room is lit with a single bulb, casting long shadows over mismatched furniture. Dorel wears an expression of absolute seriousness as he taps Firicel's knee with a spoon, takes notes in a greasy notebook, and mutters phrases like possible respiratory imbalance. The humor arises not from the absurd actions, but from Dorel's conviction. He genuinely believes he is helping. The way Firicel and his wife nod respectfully only amplifies the irony. Sometimes, confidence alone can produce credibility. Soon, the entire village starts talking about Dr. Dorel. Gossip spreads faster than reason, and by the next day, a line forms outside his shed. The range of ailments is comically vast. Aches, heartbreaks, even a chicken that refuses to lay eggs. Each case reveals something deeper about the villagers, their vulnerability, their faith, their craving for attention. In these moments, the series transcends simple comedy and turns into a sociological portrait. The village becomes a metaphor for a world where information is scarce and belief fills the void. One of the most striking scenes occurs when Dorel visits Celentano, who claims to suffer from fatigue of the soul. Sitting on the porch surrounded by empty bottles, Celentano confesses that life feels heavy and meaningless. Dorel, after a pause, prescribes something revolutionary. Go home, sleep, and dream about the time when you were young. The line, meant as nonsense, lands with unexpected depth. Celentano nods, teary-eyed, as if hearing a prophecy. It's a moment that captures the essence of Las Fierbinți, stupidity and wisdom coexisting in perfect harmony. The nurse's arrival mid-episode disrupts the fragile ecosystem of Dorel's newfound fame. She represents logic, education, and the modern world, stepping into a place where superstition reigns. The contrast between her sterile professionalism and the village's improvised faith is visually emphasized through color and framing. The nurse's white uniform appears blindingly clean against the earthy tones of the village, and her confusion when meeting Dorel is played with understated comedy. Instead of ridiculing him outright, she watches, fascinated by how everyone treats him as genuine. This dynamic introduces a subtle moral question. If a lie brings comfort, does the truth still have an obligation to expose it? The tension rises when a child falls ill. The villagers rush to Dorel, begging him to help. His hands shake, his confidence wavers, and for the first time, he feels the crushing weight of his pretense. The camera moves in close, capturing the sweat on his forehead, the tremor in his voice as he repeats, "We'll fix it." What follows is one of the most emotional sequences in Las Fierbinți history. Dorel, overwhelmed and terrified, improvises care, cold compresses, stories, small gestures of comfort. Miraculously, the child recovers, thanks not to any medical knowledge, but to timing and luck. Yet for the villagers, it is a miracle, and for Dorel, a burden. This event transforms him. The following scenes depict Dorel retreating into quiet reflection. He sits outside at night, looking up at the stars, speaking to himself about purpose. Maybe being a doctor isn't about knowing. Maybe it's about caring. The line feels spontaneous, but it encapsulates the show's ethos perfectly. Las Fierbinți has always celebrated flawed people who, despite ignorance, remain fundamentally kind. Dorel, through his foolishness, becomes a moral center for the community, a reminder that decency does not require intelligence. The cinematography supports this transformation beautifully. The lighting softens as Dorel becomes more self-aware. The framing grows wider, less claustrophobic. Even the soundtrack shifts from playful to melancholic, blending accordion and guitar in a tender waltz. Every technical choice contributes to an atmosphere of bittersweet humanity. The viewer no longer laughs at Dorel, but with him. One of the most symbolic moments comes near the end, when Dorel visits the village well and sees his reflection in the water. He dips his hand, watches the ripples distort his image, and whispers, "Maybe this is enough." It's a brief but powerful metaphor for identity, distorted, uncertain, yet still real. When the nurse later finds him and thanks him for bringing calm to the people, her words carry an almost spiritual undertone. She doesn't expose him, she honors him. The lie, by then, has transformed into a collective act of hope. In the final minutes, Dorel closes his office. The villagers, instead of mocking him, bring gifts: bread, wine, flowers. They have forgiven his deception because, in a sense, it was never about deceit. It was about belonging. The camera lingers on Dorel's face as he smiles, not triumphantly but quietly, with the humility of a man who has learned his limits. The screen fades as the sound of laughter mixes with birdsong. The deeper beauty of Doctorul Dorel, Partea 1, lies in how it blurs the line between parody and empathy. On one level, it's a hilarious portrayal of village absurdity. On another, it's an allegory about how societies create their own truths. Dorel's journey mirrors the universal human experience of performance, how every person in some way plays a role to be accepted. His doctorhood is just an exaggerated version of the masks we all wear to feel significant. Comparing this episode to other rural comedies, it feels uniquely compassionate. There is none of the cruelty or cynicism that often infects satire. Instead, there's a warmth that resembles Italian neorealism, the idea that even in foolishness there is grace. The villagers are caricatures, but never monsters. Dorel's deception becomes a collective dream, a shared illusion that momentarily lifts everyone out of their dull routines. In that sense, he is not a fraud, but an artist, crafting meaning out of emptiness. For audiences familiar with Las Fierbinți, this episode marks a turning point in tone. It elevates Dorel from comic relief to tragicomic protagonist. The humor remains abundant, but its laughter feels deeper, tinged with empathy. The writing subtly exposes the fragility of dignity in places where opportunity is scarce. People like Dorel are both mocked and needed, laughed at and loved. They represent the contradictions of a society that simultaneously rejects and depends on its dreamers. By the end of Doctorul Dorel, Partea 1, what began as a farce becomes an emotional revelation. The fake doctor heals not through medicine, but through presence. He listens, he comforts, and in doing so, he reminds the audience that sometimes the simplest act of attention is enough to change a life. The episode closes with a soft fade-out rather than a punchline, allowing its tenderness to linger. Viewed through a critical lens, the episode's brilliance lies in its equilibrium. It balances absurdity with depth, humor with sadness, simplicity with symbolism. Every detail, from Dorel's trembling hands to the villagers' naive faith, contributes to a portrait of humanity that is both ridiculous and sublime. It stands as one of the most thoughtful chapters in the Las Fierbinți universe, proving that laughter and compassion are not opposites, but partners. Doctorul Dorel, Partea 1, is not a story about deception. It's a story about longing. It's about a man who wanted to be seen, a community that needed something to believe in, and a world where kindness sometimes masquerades as foolishness. In the end, Dorel does not cure the sick. He cures loneliness, the most persistent illness of all.